The rain had been relentless all weekend, turning the small town of Ashwick into a sodden gray smear. By Monday morning, the storm had softened to a drizzle, but the air hung heavy with unease. Clara Henshaw, a librarian in her early 30s, woke to the sound of water dripping somewhere in her old Victorian home. She lay still, listening, her breath shallow. The drip was irregular, not like a faucet. It came from downstairs. Clara's house, inherited from her grandmother, was a creaking relic filled with shadowed corners and locked rooms she'd never bothered to explore. She preferred the library, where books offered predictable worlds. But today was her day off, and the library was closed. Mondays always felt hollow to her, like the world was holding its breath. She pulled on a sweater and descended the narrow staircase, her bare feet cold against the wood. The dripping grew louder, echoing from the kitchen. The air felt wrong, too thick, almost oily. She hesitated at the threshold, her hand hovering over the light switch. When she flicked it, the bulb buzzed and died, leaving the room in a dim gray haze. The kitchen was empty, but the sink was brimming with dark, viscous liquid. Not water. It shimmered faintly, like oil, but smelled of iron and decay. Clara's stomach churned. The drip came from the overflow, each drop hitting the counter with a wet plop. She reached for the faucet, but her hand froze mid-air. The liquid moved, rippling upward against gravity, forming tendrils that quivered toward her fingers. She yanked her hand back, heart pounding. The tendrils collapsed, sinking back into the pool. Clara stumbled out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. Her phone was upstairs, but as she reached the staircase, a low hum vibrated through the house. It wasn't mechanical, it was alive, like a chorus of voices, too faint to decipher. It came from the basement. Clara had never gone down there. The door tucked beneath the staircase was always locked, the key lost years ago. Her grandmother had warned her as a child, "Don't ask about the basement, Clara. Some doors stay shut for a reason." But now, the door stood ajar, a sliver of darkness leaking out. The hum grew louder, pulling at her like a current. She should have run. She should have grabbed her keys and fled into the rain. But something held her, an itch in her mind, a need to know. She nudged the door open with her foot. The air beyond was colder, sharper, carrying the same iron stench as the kitchen. A wooden staircase descended into blackness, each step sagging under invisible weight. Clara fumbled for her phone's flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The screen flickered, displaying random symbols before going dead. She cursed under her breath and gripped the banister. The hum was louder now, almost a chant, weaving through her thoughts. Her legs moved before she could stop them, carrying her downward. The basement was vast, far larger than the house above. The walls were rough stone, slick with moisture, carved with symbols that hurt her eyes to look at. In the center of the room stood a well, its rim crumbling, its depths swallowing all light. The hum came from within, rising and falling like breath. Clara's skin prickled. She wanted to turn back, but her feet wouldn't obey. The well wanted her closer. She leaned over the edge. The darkness pulsed, alive, and something stirred below. A shape too vast to comprehend, coiling and uncoiling. Eyes glinted in the void, not human, not animal, but ancient and hungry. Clara's scream caught in her throat as the hum became words, slithering into her mind. "You've come. You're ours." She staggered back, tripping over a loose stone. Her hands scraped the floor, and she felt something cold and metallic. A key, rusted but intact. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Some doors stay shut." But this wasn't the basement door's key. It was something else, something older. The air grew heavier, pressing against her chest. The thing in the well was rising, its presence filling the room. Clara scrambled to her feet, clutching the key, and ran for the stairs. The hum chased her, growing into a deafening roar. She slammed the basement door shut, but the lock was broken. The wood rattled as something pressed against it from below. Clara fled to the kitchen, her mind racing. The sink was still full, the liquid now spilling over the counter, pooling on the floor. It moved toward her, slow but deliberate, forming shapes. Faces, hands, mouths that whispered her name. She backed away, her eyes darting to the hallway. There was another door, one she'd always ignored, tucked behind a faded tapestry in the dining room. Her grandmother had called it the spare room, but Clara had never seen it opened. She tore the tapestry aside, revealing a heavy oak door carved with the same symbols as the basement walls. The key in her hand burned, as if eager. The house groaned, the walls creaking like bones. The liquid from the kitchen was seeping into the hallway, and the basement door splintered with a loud crack. She had no choice. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked, and the door swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. Clara hesitated. The house only had 2 floors. There was no attic, no space for this staircase. But the air from above was different, clean, almost sweet. She climbed, the door slamming shut behind her. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling tighter as she ascended. The walls closed in, brushing her shoulders, and the air grew warmer, humid. Her breath came in gasps, but she couldn't stop. The hum was fainter now, but it still lingered, a thread tugging at her mind. Finally, the stairs ended at a small, round door, barely tall enough for her to crawl through. She pushed it open and emerged into a room that shouldn't exist. It was circular, windowless, lit by a sourceless, sickly glow. The walls were covered in mirrors, each reflecting a different version of Clara, some older, some younger, some with eyes that weren't hers. In the center stood a stone altar, stained with something dark and crusted. On it lay a book, its cover pulsing like living flesh. Clara approached, drawn despite herself. The book's pages were blank at first, but as she stared, words appeared, scrawled in her own handwriting. "You opened the door. You let us in." Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. They described her life, every moment, every thought, every fear. The final page was incomplete, ending mid-sentence. She stood before the altar and a mirror shattered behind her. Clara spun, her reflection splintering into 1,000 pieces. The other mirrors followed, one by one, until the room was filled with jagged shards. The reflections moved, stepping out of the glass, their faces twisting into something not quite human. They spoke in unison, their voices blending with the hum. "Stay, become." Clara bolted for the door, but it was gone. The walls were seamless, trapping her with the reflections. They closed in, their hands cold as they grazed her skin. She screamed, swinging the book at them. It struck one, and the reflection dissolved into ash, but more took its place. The altar began to glow, the stains on it writhing like worms. She threw the book onto the altar, hoping to disrupt whatever was happening. The glow intensified, and the reflections froze, their eyes wide with something like fear. The room shook, the walls cracking, and the hum became a wail. Clara's vision blurred as the altar split open, revealing a void identical to the well below. The thing from the well was here too. It poured upward, a mass of eyes and limbs and hunger. The reflections scattered, some leaping into the void, others crumbling to dust. Clara pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. The key was still in her pocket, its heat searing her thigh. She pulled it out, its edges glowing faintly. A voice, not the hum, but her grandmother's, whispered, "The key locks as well as opens." Clara didn't understand, but she had nothing else. She lunged for the altar, dodging the thing's flailing limbs, and slammed the key into the book's cover. It sank in like a knife, and the void screamed. The room collapsed inward, the mirrors imploding, the altar crumbling. Clara was falling, weightless, through darkness. When she hit the ground, she was back in her kitchen, sprawled on the floor. The sink was empty, the basement door shut, the house silent. The key was gone. She staggered to her feet, her body aching. The clock read 8:03 a.m. Only minutes had passed. The rain still fell outside, but the air felt lighter. Clara checked every door, every room. The spare room was gone, the tapestry covering bare wall. The basement door was locked, as it always had been. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. The hum was gone, but she felt it waiting, just beyond her senses. On Wednesday, she went to the library, desperate for normalcy. But as she shelved books, she found one out of place, a thin, leather-bound volume with no title. Her hands shook as she opened it. The pages were blank, except for one sentence in her handwriting. "You locked the door, but we're still here." Clara burned the book in her backyard that night, watching the flames until dawn. She told herself it was over, but every Monday, the dripping starts again, faint, irregular, coming from nowhere and everywhere. She doesn't look for the source anymore. She knows it's waiting. And one day, she might answer.